Is my mic okay? Great, thank you, Kim. So this workshop will explore ways to critique academic literature. Imagine that you have a journal article or an academic book in front of you and you want to critique it. This workshop will help you do that with full confidence. As I said in the video, we will undermine the literature. We won't attack it directly. We will be very sneaky and attack its foundations. Dialogue is fundamental to this session. As always, the success of this session relies on your contribution. The tradition of pedagogy that I'm from appreciates your insight and your lived experience. So please engage and ask questions at any time, anytime. You do not have to take notes because this session is recorded. And if anybody comes late, can you tell them in the chat that this session is being recorded if they ask? Let me click. So yeah, I developed this workshop to address this statement. I hear this a lot. I do not have the confidence to critique scholars. Does anybody feel this way? You can let me know in the chat, or I prefer to hear your voices. Does anybody feel this way? Or do we feel fully confident to critique scholars?
No, with anything that doesn't look like an opinion.
Okay. Okay, all right then. Okay, all right. So hopefully we can remove this concern, because we are not here to say that a scholar is right or wrong. We're not here to critique their data. We're not here to critique their theories or their findings. Instead, we are here to critique the foundations, which I believe is a far easier task. So in this session, we will ask 3 questions. Is the text too general? Number 2, is the text outdated? Number 3, the text states that something has changed, but has anything really changed? Is the text too general? You can critique a text because it's too general. So let's just say your focus is the UK, but the text in front of you is looking at Europe. You can critique the text on that basis. Or maybe your focus is older people. That's the focus of your essay. But the text that you're looking at is looking at the wider population. So you can critique a text on that basis. Or perhaps your focus is the 1990s, a very small time frame, but the text in front of you is looking at the wider 20th century. You can critique a text on that basis. So for example, Smith's study is too generic to aid my analysis. Although Smith's study tackles a similar area to this study, his coverage is too broad to inform this study. So very simple. We're not saying that the author's right or wrong. We're just saying that his study is too general. The first question on that sheet was, imagine that the aim of your essay is to write about the role of UK early childhood institutions in preventing childhood obesity. Which of the articles below is too general for your study? Is article A too general for your study, or is article B too general for your study? Yeah, and I think everybody would agree. Article B, yeah. Excellent. So what could be the possible disadvantages of a general study? For instance, what could be the disadvantages of a study that looks at the whole of Europe instead of just the UK? Reliability. Joshua, would you like to expand on that? That's a great point. Would you like to
Yeah, no worries. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you perfectly, yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. The reason why I said reliability is because if it's in the whole of Europe rather than a specific country in Europe, your research might find a certain finding, but it might not be relevant to, let's say, for example, something that's happening in the UK. It might be different in the UK.
Excellent. Great point, Joshua. Any other disadvantages? We've got point number 1 here. Any number 2s? Go ahead, Azalea.
It's kind of similar to what Joshua said, that cultural differences might distort the data. If you
distort the data, yeah. So, with the excellent responses from Joshua and Azalea, we can start to build an argument. If I just said Johnson's argument is too generic, that is too simple. I need to explain why Johnson being generic is not helpful. Azalea's and Joshua's arguments. Help me explain why being generic is unhelpful. This is how we build critical arguments. You make a claim, then you provide reasons, like the reasons provided by Joshua and Azalea. This is a critical argument. Generality is harmful. So yeah, you see the headline in Bloomberg about women's health harmed as studies ignore gender. Women were harmed because studies didn't focus on them specifically. Or the COVID-19 skin rash website that contained general pictures of skin rashes. Out of the 100 pictures, only 2 were members of the BAME community. So this community was harmed by a general approach. So we can start to see how being general is problematic. Being general is harmful. And I have some examples of that. So Johnson's studies fails to appreciate the importance of focusing on a single community. His conflation of communities prevents us from seeing an accurate picture. Or his conflation of legislations, his conflation of regulations prevents us from seeing an accurate picture. He has not taken into account recent studies that focus on smaller units. Such a broad sweep has limited usage. And also, using this general approach, you can also group studies together. This is great for a literature review, or even just an assignment to show that you can group studies together, that you can categorize different studies. This goes back to the origin of the word critique. The origin of this word meant to separate, to delineate, to create criteria. So as you are reading articles, why not make notes? These are general articles. These are specific articles. So if we see from example 1, the student has sectioned out a group of studies that takes a broad or a general international approach. And we see the multiple references: Arthur 2018, Crook 2019, Dory 2020. So they've grouped all of these studies together. And this is something that your marker likes because it shows that you have an overview of the topic. Or example 2, there are a number of studies in this area that focus on the entire industry. In contrast, some scholars have taken a different approach by focusing on particular industries. So now we can get into comparing and contrasting. We're comparing general studies with much more specific studies. And what else can we do? And number 3, the studies that focus on the older population are more useful than the studies that focus on the entire population, because, and you're going to explain why. You're going to explain why in this regard. So just by doing this, just by grouping these studies, it's an excellent way to show the lecturer, to show the person marking your work that you have an overview of the topic. So bringing everything together, you can critique a text because it's too general. Generic approaches can be harmful and problematic.
Yes.
Great, thank you. Great. All right, then we're going to move on to question 2. Is the text outdated? So when you check the publication date of the book or article, if it was published before a major event took place, you can critique it. For example, a journal article on the extension of parental rights was published in 2018. However, a major law was enacted in 2019. This major law was impactful. This major law changed the landscape. Now we are looking at that same article, the 2018 article, in 2021. Now this article is only partially relevant because it was published before the major law came into force. The 2018 journal article did not discuss the impact of the major law because it was published before the law was enacted. So now we can critique this outdated 2018 article. Is that clear, everyone?
Yeah, that's clear. Very clear.
Yeah, thank you. So let me move on to the next one. So here are some examples. Huda's analysis of reform in the area of parental rights is limited because it was published before the Parental Rights Act 2018 was enacted. Johnson's study was lightly used because it was published before the recommendations of the Monroe Review were implemented. So what events may render an academic study partially irrelevant? I have an act of parliament, legislation, an appointment of a government commission. Are there any events that may render the academic study still partly useful, but it's only, but there's some issue in terms of relevance of today's situation? It's pre and post COVID. Yes, yeah, would be a common question for research. Yeah, definitely. EMEA, definitely EMEA. Yeah, yeah. Any other events?
Oh, Brexit.
Brexit. Yeah, yeah. Ideas around the development technology. Yes, yes. Like changing ideas as well. And what's something that we all had to fill in by law very recently?
Census.
Census. Yes. So we have new data from that. So maybe that tells a different story. And so Me Too, Black Lives Matter, cultural movements, cultural moments. Yes, excellent. Yeah, these things really change the landscape. Let's move on to the next. And so there are two benefits of looking at the date of publication. Number one, it helps you develop a rationale. So, for example, several monumental events have occurred since Johnson 2017 wrote about intersectionality. Thus, my study represents a much needed update. And this gives your work much more significance, especially if you're doing your research project now, your dissertation, even your assignment. Like, really point this out, that your assignment is a much needed update, because maybe something has happened and your assignment is able to comment on this, whereas the studies that came before were not able to comment on this. Or number two, it shows that you are aware of context. You haven't just picked the article randomly. You are aware of the wider context. Johnson's 2018 article was published in a period when. So you understand what came before the article was written, what was happening during the time the article was written, and what happened after the article was published. So these two things are very important. And just to wrap up, always pay attention to the publication date. Think about the universe around your journal article. We tend to think of articles like Picture One, separate and scattered pieces. But we should think of articles like Picture Two. Everything is connected. Scholars react to other scholars. Scholars react to events. Scholars build on older theories. Scholars stand on the shoulders of other scholars. Nobody writes in a vacuum. And we're moving steadily ahead. So the last question, I think it's going to be a very short session today. Let's see how this goes anyway. So yeah, the last question, has anything really changed? When issues are presented as new, you can argue that not much has changed. We see this constantly in the literature. A scholar comes out with a paradigm shift, a new model, a new genre, a new perspective, new epistemology, new way of looking at the world. Whenever you see something new, you can critique it. So the tone of your critique is essentially calm down. So you imagine you're a grumpy parent, so calm down. So a critical question we can ask is, do we need something brand new? Couldn't we just update what we already have? Why do we want to throw the baby out with the bathwater? Alternatively, is there some resemblance to something in the past? Is there something in this new model or new theory or new event that resembles the past? Not much changes. Matters rarely change overnight. Anything like that you've seen that doesn't resemble anything that came before?
I think it all depends on the context and what you're comparing, right? Because,
Yeah.
Well, for us, living creatures of today, maybe COVID is new, but there have been pandemics in the past, right? Maybe we don't have enough data or things like that, or even when you change presidents and in countries that maybe have even worse situations, no, where suddenly there is a tsunami and the wealth and the resources of the country are not there any longer. So
Yeah,
it's really
yeah.
what you're studying.
So I've got one last activity to end the session, and let me read this out to you. So the new theory of connectivism, Siemens and Downs argue that the way in which we learn and teach has fundamentally changed. Our ways of sharing and receiving information or knowledge bears little resemblance to generations past. We are connected in ways that our parents could not comprehend. Thus, we need to move beyond learning theories and approaches that were developed before the advent of internet technologies. We need to get rid of Dewey, Bandura, Paulo, Giroux, get rid of them all. We need to develop new theories that best represent our present situation. So, like, I want to know from you guys, is he right? Should we scrap what we know about teaching? We are in a new environment. Teaching and learning has changed. There's no classroom. I'm talking to a computer screen right now. I can't see anybody. And I don't know if you're bored. I don't know if you're frustrated. I don't even know that you're here. I can see an icon on the screen, but you could have left. Should we scrap everything what we know about teaching and learning, because we're teaching and learning in fundamentally different scenarios, where many of those learning and teaching theories were developed in the 20th century before the advent of internet technologies? So I want to know from you guys, do you agree with Siemens and Downs? Do you disagree with them? Or how can we calm them down? Like, what side of the fence are you guys on in terms of this? Go ahead, Joshua.
Yeah, so I would say old-fashioned learning, if you want to put that in quotations. I feel that it still serves a purpose, and I think for me, I've always preferred it for a long time. Experiencing a different way of learning, I've seen the benefits of that as well. So I definitely know some people prefer it if they learn the new way that we're learning currently, but there's some people that would like to revert back to that old way. So maybe a mixture of the two in some way might provide a third way, if you want to call it that.
Or how can we calm these guys down?
Well,
How can we?
I'm just thinking, and I will embarrass myself because I have just learning and development in the MSc of Organizational Psychology last term. So probably should even have more stronger arguments, but there is an assumption here that all theories are linked and especially described to be not online and face to face, which I have not seen. I'm not seeing many of those theories that start with it has to be face to face and it has to be in paper and pen. So it's also about what assumptions they are making about those theories and how they are oversimplifying, going back to generalization. No, so the first question is it too general, that statement, and really going back to what we have learned. Distance learning, maybe not online, but distance learning has been there for some years now. Open University and the likes, and online learning has existed for some time now. Of course, it depends on whose parents they are talking about. If they are my parents or the parents of someone who right now is 80-year old, but it's really, some of the learning theories are also quite new. So it's too general, this statement, and it's oversimplifying the whole area of research as learning and development. And many of those theories also focus on how people learn. It's not about, which don't focus really on the media. It's about the psychological, the neurological processes, the stimulus that are needed, and so on. So definitely I can see the generalization piece and the what has really changed here to be helping to calm down.
Let's move on. So, so bringing everything together. So as soon as you see the word new, critique, rarely do things happen all of a sudden. Don't believe the hype in that regards. And just a general summary, read, and read some more. And if you didn't come to last week's session, then please check out the YouTube video for that, where I have some reading techniques